Well, hello there. It's almost March. This weekend is the Academy Awards, and I'm finally getting down to making a top 10 films of 2015 list. Something that every movie geek is sort of required by law to do. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why did it take you so long? Well, I have a part-time job and I go to school full-time. So I simply do not have the time to do this all that often. I just kind of want to get it in before the Oscars. I mean, I would love to be able to just see every movie I want to see and do nothing but write movie reviews. Right now I do write movie reviews, this time at 83.wordpress.com, but I just do it for my own sake. I don't do it for any professional thing, and you can tell by the hit count, which is usually in the low tens for each review. But if you'd like to pay me to be a professional film critic, I'd sure be able to do it. So the normal caveats for any top 10 list. It's just my opinion. My opinion may be more or less informed than you think is worthy of making a list. And the point of these lists is normally just to encourage discussion, argue about the merits or demerits of any individual list, and just for movie geeks to just kind of talk about what they liked most of the year. My own list, I usually have two different categories. There's favorites, movies that just appeal to me as a person that I personally like, and movies that I'm sort of grading kind of objectively as best. For instance, my favorite movie is Fight Club, but I recognize the best movie of all time as being Citizen Kane. My own personal top 10 list is usually a hodgepodge. It's usually movies that I think are of high quality, but also movies that normally wouldn't make a top 10 list, but that just I personally really liked. Also, this is a top 10 list of the movies that I actually saw from 2015, and I did not get a chance to see every movie I wanted to see that may have made this list otherwise. Those movies include The End of the Tour, which is about David Foster Wallace, one of my favorite authors. Trumbo, which involves the old Hollywood Red Scare and communism, some topics that I really like. Suffragette, about British women who are terrorists who bring about the vote. That seems right up my alley. Or Carol, a movie from the guy who made Far From Heaven, which was a play on the Douglas Sirk-type movies from the 60s. And this new movie was by him, and it seemed to get some of the highest reviews of any movie nominated for an Oscar, even though it didn't get a Best Picture nomination. So, without that further ado, let's begin the list. Alright, yes, number 10 is Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. I know this isn't one of the better films of the latter half of Tarantino's filmography. I did like Hateful Eight more than I liked Django, but I did not like it as much as Inglourious Basterds. Yeah, it got a lot of flack. It has quite a sexist view of women. I mean, every woman in the movie is kind of a stereotype. Jennifer Lee Jason Leigh, even though she's kind of a bad person, still gets the shit kicked out of her for most of the movie, so not the most progressive movie in how it portrays women. That being said, it still has some great vista shots. I unfortunately saw it in digital. I did not see the 70mm roadshow. There was a theater showing it an hour away from me, but I'm not comfortable driving there, so I didn't go see it in the 70mm. But even still, the expansive views, and also it's a very stage or play-like movie, so actually having that wider scope actually made it feel more claustrophobic and made the set feel more like you're watching a live stage play than a movie, even though there's obviously camera tricks and Tarantino's editing and stuff like that, though we do miss Sally. And I think while the movie is kind of muddled on its message, the message seems to be that America is built on lies and racism, since lying and untruths, and whether they're for good reason or bad, seems to be the motif that goes beyond as the thread line through the film. But I really did enjoy the movie quite a bit, and I think perhaps, there are people who don't like Tarantino's stance on police violence, so I think there was some backlash for that. It's also Tarantino's longest film, if you're not counting the fact that Kill Bill is really one movie and not two. If that's just under 3 hours for the regular version, or just over 3 hours for the roadshow version. So I think there was a lot of backlash on that end, and I don't know, I think people are just kind of spoiled because it really is a very good film and a good example of Tarantino's work, even if it wouldn't be in the higher echelons of his work. Yeah, number 9 is Dope. I liked Dope because right now Hollywood is just selling nostalgia back to our generation, which lived it, and the generation below me, which did not live through it, but has heard of it secondhand, perhaps through their parents or older siblings. And it's really about sort of early 90s, kids today who are obsessed with the early 90s, but are also very much tied into the youth of today. I mean, there's a big plot device around Bitcoin. There's a lot of contrast between hip-hop of today versus hip-hop then. I'm not a fan of rapper hip-hop, but it was still kind of interesting to me. I liked the characters. The film very much feels like a Ferris Bueller's Day Off type movie, sort of like if Spike Lee made a John Hughes movie, if that makes sense. Or John Singleton actually kind of feels more like John Singleton playing John Hughes. And so I really like the sort of young kids, like 17, 18 years old, getting in over their heads throughout this movie that takes place over the course of pretty much a single day. It's a little bit more than a day, but the main action takes place during a day. And it's quite a funny and clever movie. And then, yeah, it ends on a serious note about racism and things. But it really was one of the better indie films that ended up getting a wide release. It didn't do perhaps as well as the studio wanted it to, and it didn't quite enter the cultural zeitgeist as much as people thought it would. But it's a movie that I've looked back on from the year 2015, and it's sort of endeared to me more and more. And I didn't expect that going into the movie. I went into it just because it had some good pre-reviews from the film festivals, and I actually quite enjoyed it. So it stuck with me enough to make it to number 9. Number 8 is Diary of a Teenage Girl, another indie movie that not many people saw. The movie's not really original in content. It's basically about like a teenage girl has a sexual relationship with an older man, and it's her coming of age and stuff. But a lot of those movies tend to be very judgmental toward the girl, or sort of view her as naive or look down upon her. Movies like 13, where it's really about the danger, sort of things like that. Stuff like Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Jennifer Jason Leigh's character is not quite judged, but she's viewed as an object of pity. This movie, the character obviously makes mistakes. She's obviously naive, but the film views it with less judgmental eyes. Like, there's one moment where she makes a mistake, and then the next scene they cut to her and her friend talking like, "That was a mistake. We shouldn't do it again." Like, they've learned from their lesson, and the mistakes haven't broken her as a person, even though they've definitely shaped her life. But she's still better for it. And then there's other stuff like the main character's an artist, so you get some of the drawings incorporated into the movie, so it sort of feels like an American Splendor or Art School Confidential or Ghost World type of movie at times. It's very similar to those movies in tone, like a Terry Zwigoff movie almost. But it was sort of a refreshing look at a plot that is not itself all that original, and it had great acting. The main actress, Belle, sorry for forgetting her last name, was very good. Alexandra Skarsgård's in it. Kristen Wiig doesn't have much to do in it, but she's good with what she is. Sort of it's sort of a liberal, lower middle class to slightly upper middle class sort of bohemian lifestyle that she's lived in. So it's sort of the clash between conventional morality and an attempt to be more than conventional morality, even if you're pulled toward conventional morality. And it was a sort of a very interesting look. I mean, the movie takes place in the early 70s, so it also has an interesting time feel to it and has some a good 70s soundtrack in it. But it was a very good movie, unjustly ignored by mass audiences. Number 7 is Room. Not The Room with Tommy Wiseau, but Room. I had read the book Room a few years ago by Emma Donoghue, something like that. And the book was interesting because it was written in the first-person perspective from the point of view of a 6-year-old boy, and it actually sounded and felt like that. And even though it's sort of trapped in this very, not very verbal voice, it still was able to convey lots of information, so you got a good sense of the world, but the interesting first-person perspective made it a very original story. The movie, well, movies are different, even though it has some narration in it, movies are a more objective standpoint than a first-person book. So by taking the story outside and being a movie, it sort of switches the experience. It is a slightly lesser experience than the book because of that. But what's interesting is that as a film, while the book is mostly about the protagonist, the movie, in some ways, also equally as much about the mother. The mother, for those of you who don't know, the movie's about a girl kidnapped, kept in a shed, which is pretty much like one of these women who were kept in sex dungeons by these predators and like raped repeatedly. And she has a son who she keeps in the shed, and then the movie takes place just after he turns 6. So they've been living together. In the movie, by showing the mother, who's played brilliantly by Brie Larson, I hope she wins Best Actress, it shows like her guilt and her conflicted feelings about that. I mean, we can all imagine that, yeah, she could have given up the baby, and the rapist probably would have just left it at a firehouse or something. It seems like something the rapist of this movie would do. He wouldn't just, have killed the baby. But she was, selfish and wanted company because she was alone in there. She had nothing to look forward to but being raped every night, so you can understand her thinking, even though it's heart-wrenching and probably not the best thing to do for the kid. And so the guilt that's on Brie Larson's face and the anger of having all those years stolen away from her, it's a profoundly depressing but very powerful film. And if I have any caveats to it, it's just that I read the book first, and the book is better because of that first-person dynamic. But still, as a movie, it's translated phenomenally well, and is a really, really good film, especially from a first-time director, or an almost first-time director, as I recall, Lenny Abramson, I think. Sorry, I'm bad with names while I'm making this video. But a really, really powerful film, and well deserving of its Best Picture and Best Director nominations. Grandma, another ignored independent film. I know, people, all my friends and stuff who know I'm a movie geek, they're always asking for movie recommendations, and they expect me to say, I don't know, like Deadpool or something. I mean, Deadpool's a good movie, but it's not going to make my top 10. I mean, I prefer movies that have a bit more substance to them, and then people, their eyes glaze over because they don't care about that because people are idiots. But Grandma was a really funny movie, and it's kind of an interesting dynamic. It's about like a lesbian grandmother who spends the day trying to get her granddaughter an abortion, which is, or at least the money for the abortion because they're expensive and everything. And I know people are like, well, abortion's not that expensive, right? I thought they were like $600. It's like, no, I mean, especially with all the Republican laws going on right now that make it like an entire state has like one location and all that shit. But it's quite a good movie because these characters are very fun and lively. Lily Tomlin, I mean, she's, she comes back sort of with a force as this lead character. She's just acerbic and great, and there's these great supporting turns, especially from Sam Elliott. Sam Elliott plays an ex-boyfriend of Lily Tomlin's, and his performance has a certain pathos, a certain like really wrenching sadness where you can really feel what he's conflicted about in his sadness, and yet before that sadness happens, he's really funny, and his character is great, and it's really, I did not expect the guy behind American Pie and About a Boy and movies that didn't quite show this quality to be this sharp. And even though it's about, abortion and stuff, it doesn't feel like a hot-button movie. I mean, it feels sort of like the way Juno perhaps should have gone if it didn't have such reactionary politics. Yeah, I do really like the movie Juno, though, don't get me wrong on that. But it's interesting to just sort of treat abortion like the way it is, not as this hot-button topic, though, I mean, it is also that, but as, a legal procedure that is unfortunately hard to get for people who do opt into it. I mean, chances are, if you're watching my channel, the Marxist atheist, you're probably not that pro-life if you're actually even watching my videos. But I mean, even if you're against it, let other people have it. I know you realize, yeah, it's murder because life begins when semen shoots out of a penis, but it's sort of interesting and unique and refreshing to have sort of abortion just treated as a matter-of-fact, almost medical procedure. And yeah, and it's not treated flippantly, though. It's just treated as, like any other medical procedure. I mean, you weigh the pros and the cons, and then you make your decision. It's the same thing about whether you want to do, like, chemo or radiation when you have cancer. But aside from all that heavy stuff, and there is some drama in the movie, it is quite funny and just a really, really good movie, and it's only like 70-something minutes. I mean, you don't even have to spend much time to watch it, and it's again, a shame. It was a movie that was slightly expanded beyond limited release. It was sort of like a 500-screen release, and it didn't quite get the attention outside of critics, so really good movie. Check it out if you can, and you're not one of those wacky pro-life people. 5 is Sicario. Sicario was a movie I did not expect to like as much as I did, but it's an interesting film in that the ultimate message of the movie is that the United States is pursuing a horrendous and perhaps even illegal policy fighting a war on drugs because it does not view any good option as feasible, so it's pretty much attempting to do the less evil option. And, because in the movie, the US government is essentially conspiring with a more peaceful drug cartel from Colombia to shut down the more violent drug cartels of Mexico. So it's sort of the choosing the lesser of two evils, and the United States government ends up sort of breaking rules or following the technicality of rules to do that. And it's about what happens when a main character, played by Emily Blunt, or one of the better lead female roles in one of these more sort of masculine-themed films that I've seen, who is someone who plays by the rule and is by the book, and the film is sort of like, can you be a person who follows the rule of law and works within the system when the system is corrupt and crumbling around you? Is that possible? And to what extent or success is that possible? I mean, beyond that, the movie's phenomenally well acted. It has a very interesting, not quite usual structure. I mean, it still has like 3 acts, but the way that it doesn't follow the normal through line, so it's a bit more interesting and original at the screenplay level. But Benicio del Toro's great, Emily Blunt is great, Josh Brolin's got a good turn in it. It's just a really solid piece of filmmaking, and it has sort of interesting morality. Whether I agree with the movie's morality, or whether the movie's even advocating the morality I think it is, I'm not sure. But as far as just dredging up more interesting looks at the war on drugs, more than just drugs are bad, but the war on drugs is also bad, which the movie Traffic had. And don't get me wrong, I love Steve Soderbergh's Traffic. It was one of the best movies of the year it came out, maybe even the best movie of that year. But Traffic took a more conventional message, even though it was a very excellent film. Sicario is taking something a bit less conventional. In fact, it's not even quite concerned with drug use as much as it is about systems of authority and law enforcement and sort of the apparatuses dealing with the war on drugs. And so it's not particularly concerned with the use issue as much as it is the institutional issue of how to deal with this product. So, very, very good movie. I know other socialists have attacked it as sort of being pro-America. I didn't view the movie as pro-America at all. I mean, it does portray Mexico in perhaps a more devilish way than the country of Mexico actually is, but I think it works for the purposes of the film, and I really did enjoy Sicario a lot more than I thought I would. Number 4 is Kingsman, The Secret Service. This is one of those movies that I just, when I thought about it, that was the most fun I actually had at the movies. It wasn't Avengers or Jurassic World or any of the bigger, fun popcorn movies of the year, even though I did like a handful of those movies, Ant-Man, things like that. But Kingsman was actually the most fun I had. It's a weird movie message-wise. It tries to be sort of more progressive than the Bond movies, and yet the lead actor or the lead character is still wins the prize of being able to have anal sex with a blonde Scandinavian princess. So women are still used as prizes, so it hasn't gone beyond that sort of sexist treatment of the spy genre, especially because we had like 900 spy movies in 2015. But it was very fun, and also an odd movie about sort of where the bad guy is someone who is upset about global warming, but the movie, in the universe of the movie, global warming is not caused by carbon emissions, it's caused by the Earth viewing human beings as a disease and starting to heat itself up to kill that disease, which is a weird, interesting play on it. So it's sort of accepts global warming but gives a fictional reason for it. Weird. And the villain is basically, even though he's fighting to save the world from this thing that is not getting any better, largely in the United States because of reactionary conservative scum, he still wants to save the rich assholes of the world and let everyone else die to start his new world over. So it's a weird liberal meets John Galt's arc. The movie has weird politics, let's just put it that way. It's not quite liberal and it's not quite conservative, and I think that might be the push and pull between the James Bond spy movie, which is inherently conservative in its construction and tropes, but it's a movie still made by writers and directors and people with very liberal sympathies. And so the liberal and the conservative sort of fight and don't really mesh. Though there is an absolutely lovely action scene set to Freebird where Colin Firth gets to basically murder the entire Westboro Baptist Church. A fictional version of them, but still. And as far as just a pure action movie with one-liners and funny stuff and over-the-top gory violence, this was the single most fun popcorn movie of 2015 for me. And it came out very early in the year. It came out in February. It came out on Valentine's weekend against 50 Shades of Grey. But Kingsman really stood out to me and stood up to like everything else that came through the year. It was just a lot of fucking fun. And so for that reason, that's why it's jacked up high on this list, even though it's not the artsiest film. Alright, number 3 is Bridge of Spies. Now look, I have the same problems with Steven Spielberg that a lot of other film buffs have, which is that he plays things very safe, and that he has a very sentimental, saccharine feeling that he puts into every movie, that he's not quite hard-edged enough when he makes these sort of dramas. But it works for Bridge of Spies. Now, alright, granted, I'm predisposed to like this movie because I'm a big student of communist and Soviet history, so I like all of that. I like the iconography, I like the history of it, so a Cold War thriller that largely involves the DDR and the Soviet Union, and I've been to Berlin, so I've seen the parts of the Berlin Wall that are still up. I've gone to the DDR museum. So this plays right into my wheelhouse. Also, the main character in the movie is a lawyer, and I'm currently in school to become a paralegal because I'm very interested in the legal profession. So it's very interesting. So this is just pulling right into me. But it is a very, very well-made movie, and it's obvious that in the same way that Spielberg's film Lincoln wasn't really about Abraham Lincoln and slavery, I mean, the surface subject matter was, but that movie was really about Obamacare. With Lincoln being Obama, the radical Republicans were the people who wanted a more liberal solution by giving full citizenship to blacks. That's sort of a comparison or an analogy to the progressive caucus of the Democrats who wanted either single payer or at least a public option. And then the Southern slavery-loving Democrats of that movie Lincoln who did not want the slaves to be freed. They are analogous to the Republicans who were against Obamacare, and then the movie argues that by cutting away through the middle of both of those parts, as Obama did with Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, it ended up choosing the right path. So so that was the movie Lincoln. The movie Lincoln was really about Obamacare, and so many Republicans missed that. They also don't seem to realize that the Republican Party of Lincoln and the Democratic Party of now are pretty much the same. That the Civil War and the FDR and the Lyndon B. Johnson administration pretty much flip-flopped the ideology of both those parties. But regardless of those politics, basically, Bridge of Spies sort of works on two levels. I mean, it's partially about the war on terror, and that we should not abandon the principles of the United States, even though we're fighting what we believe to be an existential enemy. Back then it was the Soviet Union, now it is, Islamic terrorism, ISIS and Al-Qaeda and those type of groups. So that, we shouldn't be getting rid of or forgetting people's habeas corpus rights or rights to speedy trial. We shouldn't be spying on our own citizens or torturing people, especially. That, the Constitution is what makes us American. Shouldn't we show our enemy who we are? It's one of those Tom Hanks lines. So it's sort of about that. It's about that we shouldn't abandon our principles just because of the enemy we're fighting. We should be better than our enemy. So that's the first message. That's at least the message of the first half of the movie. The second half of the movie, the comparison doesn't quite follow a straight line between like how we treat Islamic terrorists. The second half of the movie, and again, this is a true story much like Lincoln, but the second half of the movie is more analogous to, say, like the Iran deal. That even if we view somebody as an existential enemy, which, I mean, Iran is not quite the same thing as like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but Republicans kind of view all the people of the Middle East as the same unless they're in Israel. But the second half of Bridge of Spies is pretty much analogous to sort of the Iran deal, that, complex negotiations involve give a little and take a little. You can't just be my way or the highway or things aren't going to work. So that was so Bridge of Spies, as a movie with a political statement, is sort of about those two things, and the movie can kind of be divided directly in half. as far as when it breaks away, because there's no common through line of the movie. But even if you do not like my interpretation of Bridge of Spies or reject it, the movie in and of itself as part history lesson in just entertaining film is very good. I mean, the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan Coen, who sometimes I don't like them because they inject way too much humor in their dramas, but in Bridge of Spies they got sort of the right note. There's just enough humor in that movie to not take away from the drama or some of the suspense of it. So I really, really enjoyed Bridge of Spies, and that's why it's this high up on my list. But I can understand the people who have it lower because the movie does still suffer from the general saccharine and traditional shit that latter-day Spielberg movies, say like after Munich or a little bit before Munich, have had. Okay, number 2 is The Big Short. Surprise, a Marxist put The Big Short in his top 10 list. But The Big Short, I did not expect the director of Talladega Nights, a movie I don't like, Anchorman 2, a movie I don't like, and all of these stupid comedies, to direct probably the best movie about the financial crisis, and I'm including documentaries like Inside Job and stuff. But The Big Short did the best job that Hollywood has done so far of explaining the 2008 financial crisis and the housing market, credit default swaps, subprime loans. All of that shit is explained really well thanks to breaking the fourth wall. Again, apologies to fans of Deadpool, but The Big Short has done the best breaking of the fourth wall of any recent film. And being able to cut away to like funny things like Margot Robbie in a bubble bath or Anthony Bourdain making stew to explain things that on the surface seem like very complicated banking things, but actually aren't all that complicated when someone explains them to you in a funny manner. And the movie's just really well edited. I mean, it's not a movie you go to see for character. It is strictly a plot movie and an information movie, but one that makes information and plot fun. And it's also an angry movie. It's a movie that's angry that no one got punished for this shit except for Bernie Madoff, because he ripped off rich people. He didn't rip off poor people. You rip off rich people, you go to jail. Rip off poor people, you get to stay the head of Goldman Sachs. Or perhaps you can run for president as under the name of, I don't know, Hillary Hinton. But it's a really, really good movie. It is superbly angry and astoundingly funny at the same time. Again, it might not be the best movie acting-wise, though I do like the acting, but the acting is nothing special because the characters aren't particularly rich, even though they're real people. But as far as the construction, the way it keeps fast-paced, the way that it delivers information and spells it out, but it doesn't get boring, and that it's able to consistently stay entertaining and informative at the same time while still having a through line of anger, but not letting that anger get in the way of delivering jokes. It's really... Adam McKay had all of the plates spinning, and it could have failed at any moment, but it doesn't. So The Big Short, just out of, I mean, my own ideology aside, my own anti-capitalist, hatred of this kind of shit aside, it's a phenomenally well-made movie in the fact that it does all of this. It manages to be informative, entertaining, have a political point. That's all very hard, and The Big Short does it beautifully. The best film of the year, if you know me personally, you know what I'm going to pick. I feel like I'm going to have to explain this one a bit. The best film of the year was It Follows. Yes, the horror movie It Follows. I love horror movies, but the problem is that most horror movies that are released in theaters now suck. And wide release in theater I'm speaking of. They're either bullshit PG-13 crap like The Boy or The Forest or shit that's been released like that recently, or they're safe studio nonsense based on jump scares like The Conjuring or Annabelle. But we're not getting good horror movies anymore theatrically released. If there are good horror movies, they're being released direct to video on demand. In which case, a few horror fans might pick them up, they might get a review in Fangoria, they might go to Screamfest or some of these horror movie film festivals, and then they disappear, and no one ever hears from them again. And it's sad. It's sad that good horror movies have lost their audience, and shit horror movies have found an audience, so that movies like The Lazarus Effect and really horrible shit like that, teenagers will still flock to these movies on a Friday, Saturday night opening weekend, and they'll make money and they'll keep making more of them, but they're fucking shit. And maybe if we get, like, an R-rated film, it's something like Sinister or Sinister 2, which are fairly weak, and I love Ethan Hawke, but still, Sinister was eh. It was a rip-off of a hodgepodge of a bunch of different movies. So the horror genre seems to be dying, and if we do get good horror movies, there's stuff like, A Horrible Way to Die, or just things that are going like direct to video on demand. So they're things that most people wouldn't be hearing of, or they're things that are being made in France, like Martyrs and stuff, or South Korea. We're not getting the good ones in America being released wide in theaters. It follows, though, it was originally going to be in limited release and video on demand, but it got such good reviews and the limited release played so well that they ended up pushing back the video on demand and expanding it into theaters. Wide release. And I'm glad they did, because It Follows is the best American horror film in at least 10 years. Probably the best one I've seen since, let's say, All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, which itself had its own release issues. And it's better than All the Boys Love Mandy Lane as well. It Follows is a great movie because the entire movie is a metaphor for death and how we hunker down and are scared of death, even though it's inevitable. A lot of people didn't seem to get that simple message, despite the fact that the movie stops and gives us 3 long Dostoevsky quotes to spell it out for the idiots in the audience. But most horror audiences, being raised or being weaned on Lazarus Effects and Sinister Twos, and on Friendeds, and Gallows, are too fucking stupid to realize this stuff. So, It Follows first of all, it has the best score of any movie of the last 5 years, perhaps. That Disaster Piece score is brilliant. And, some people complain that, it doesn't have enough jump scares, there's too much nudity, what's going on, the rules don't quite make sense. The rules make enough sense if you're fucking paying attention to the movie, by the way. That's kind of a blight on Quentin Tarantino and Eli Roth, who said that as well. So those are people who know horror movies and should know better, even though they did like the movie. But I have not seen a better directed horror movie in a long time. It Follows feels a lot like 70s John Carpenter. I was a fan of the Purge movies, especially Purge 2, and I'm looking forward to Purge 3, and I like those because they're not really horror movies, they're political messages. And those sort of feel like they live like 80s John Carpenter movies when he was getting really like fuck Reagan in his filmography. But It Follows plays like the kind of movie John Carpenter made before The Thing. It feels very much like Halloween and that sort of thing. So it's not particularly violent, but it does have some violence in it. But it's very clever, and it's very clever about the way it portrays sort of youthful ennui and the fact that these people feel like there's things they can't do, but of course they can do it because they're still alive. And I like that the climax where the kids try to come up with like a way to booby-trap the creature, sort of in a Wes Craven-y way. Like, Wes Craven always put booby-traps in his movies. It's a bad plan because they're kids and they don't know any better. And people seem to miss, like, why do they have that stupid plan? Because they're children. They're 18 years old. They're 16 to 18 in the course of the movie. And I like that the movie sort of takes place in this time frame that sort of looks like the 70s, but it's never really pinpointed. But then there's a clamshell e-reader. A lot of people harped on the fact that the monster is sort of sexually transmitted, so they just viewed it as like a metaphor for AIDS or something. It's not really. I think those are people who are viewing it a little too surface. The whole sex thing is just really sort of a plot device to keep it moving. The movie is really, though, this sort of deep meditation on fear of death, and that no matter what you do, it will always walk after it. And death is always stalking you no matter what. You can take medicine, you can be healthy, you can exercise, but everybody is going to die. No matter what the characters in this movie do, this thing is going to catch up with them. I mean, yes, we can play with plot things, like if you keep flying from coast to coast and this thing has to keep walking, then you might be able to avoid it, but then what kind of life is that? Just like, what kind of life is it to just live your entire life being afraid of death and not living? And that's sort of, the movie is, even though it's dark, it has a very uplifting message, which is, just fucking live your life. And, I mean, I articulate my view of It Follows a lot better in my written review, and I'll post links to my written reviews in the video description. But the thing is that so many people who don't know shit about what makes a good horror movie did not like It Follows, and these are the same people who like the fucking Gallows. So, they really shouldn't be talking, but it's sort of like a deep horror movie with a message that is brilliantly constructed on a nuts and bolts, like, directorial music cinematography level, can be discarded as, oh, that's just stupid, they're just walking after them, what the fuck, man, they, these fucking idiots are probably fucking Trump voters, and that they don't like it. I mean, I saw It Follows opening weekend, and there was a group of teenagers sitting behind me who kept talking the whole time, and they were just fucking idiots, and I sincerely hope they died in a car accident since that night. So I ended up having to go see the movie again later during the week, and since then I've learned that if I want to go see a horror movie, I don't see it opening weekend during the night, I see it during the day, because the assholes are in school or at work or something, so I will be in peace and respectful people will be around me, because if you talk during the movie, you are worse than Ted Cruz as a human being. But beside that point, I mean, people are just assholes and idiots, and they don't know a great horror movie when it's staring them right in the fucking face, those fucking Philistines. So, I guess because it's such a great movie, and because I loved it so much, and because there was such a backlash to it from people, from fucking imbeciles and plebeians who don't know any better, I feel the need to champion it even more. The thing is, I mean, people are always complaining, oh, they look at Rotten Tomatoes and like, oh, you can't go by the critics never know anything. Yeah, actually they kind of do. You know why? Because the critics watch thousands of movies, and they know what makes a better movie than you do. They're more informed because they watch more movies. If you trusted just your average person, then they would just be like, oh, well, it didn't get 4 stars or 5 stars on Netflix, so it's a bad movie. No, the problem is you're a fucking idiot, alright? Transformers 4 can make $500 million, but that doesn't make it a good movie. It's still fucking loud, assault on the senses piece of shit. But a lot more people are going to say that that's a good movie than they're going to say It Follows is a good movie. And that makes me weep for humanity and for film. But the fact that It Follows, it still made a lot of top 10 lists for other critics. Something that horror movies don't normally do, at least gives me hope that the movie will have a legacy beyond this year, and that it will be one of the horror movies that does survive, despite the fact that most of the good horror movies coming out now probably will be forgotten because of the way that good horror movies are released now versus the shit that gets released in theaters. So, that was my top 10 list, and a little bit of a rant toward the people who don't like It Follows. Basically, here's the thing. People have different opinions. So you can like a movie that I don't like, you can dislike a movie that I like, but it's very rare that a person's opinion in a movie will actually affect how I think of them. And if you did not like It Follows, I am going to assume you are not an intelligent person, and I will think less of you, and I will not respect you as a human being. Okay, people sometimes also ask me to do the worst films of the year list, but that would really be too many. For 2015, the worst movies that I saw in a theater, or that I saw that were released in a theater that year, were Aloha and War Room. So there you go. Those were the 2 worst I saw of 2015. Feel free to comment your opinions below, and I'll assuredly make one next year.